you lose it for a while?
Oh, God, did I lose it? Yeah, there was a certain loss, there was a certain adriftness within my own heart and life and where I was going and what I was doing and how I was going to carry on.
What Pierce Brosnan has finally revealed is leaving fans completely stunned. For years, the former James Bond star carefully protected one chapter of his life from public view. While audiences saw the confident actor, devoted husband, and Hollywood icon, there was another side to the story that remained hidden behind the cameras. Now, after decades of silence, Pierce is opening up about the tragedies that nearly broke him, and the truth he rarely discussed throughout his career. What was he hiding all this time? And why has he chosen to speak about it now? Join us as we look at Pierce Brosnan's untold story and uncover what he's been hiding all this time. The boy who lost everything. Pierce Brendan Brosnan never knew his father. He was the only child of Thomas Brosnan, a carpenter, and May Smith, who was just 19 years old when she gave birth to him. His parents had married on August 16, 1952, only 9 months before his birth. But the marriage was already fractured, and while Pierce was still an infant, Thomas left the family. Now being abandoned is hard enough, but being from a broken home in the 1950s Ireland is an even harder stigma to bear. His mother had no money or support, and after trying to raise Pierce by herself for 4 years, she made an impossible decision. She had to move to London to become a nurse. That move meant Pierce would see his mother only once or twice a year. But he was in safe hands with his maternal grandparents. But that safety was short-lived, as one after the other, Pierce's grandparents passed away. At first, he was passed to an aunt, and then an uncle. Then finally, he was at a boarding house where he lived for 3 years, sharing a room with grown men. His only privacy, a small bed at the end of the room with a curtain drawn around it. By the time Pierce was 11 years old, everything changed. His mother was now a nurse and had remarried to a World War II veteran. On August 12, 1964, Pierce left Ireland to join his mother and stepfather in London. The date carried an eerie significance, as it was the very day that Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, passed away. But Pierce would not learn of this coincidence until years later. When Pierce got to England, he was the only Irish kid in his school, and that made him a target for bullying. Classmates would taunt him with cruel nicknames insulting his accent, and each time he tried to fight back, matters got worse. But in all those difficult years, Pierce's stepfather treated him with kindness and made sure he felt like part of their family. In fact, the first time Pierce saw a Bond film, it was William who took him to the movies. Back then, Pierce had no idea he was going to grow up to play James Bond one day. As a teenager, Pierce did not dream of acting. He had always been drawn to art and had a creative eye, so he decided to become a commercial artist. He enrolled at St. Martin's School of Art in London, training in commercial illustration. He landed a job as a commercial artist, watering plants, making tea, and occasionally drawing. For a while, this seemed like his path in life. But everything changed one day when he wandered into a rehearsal at the Oval House, an experimental theater workshop in London. There, he saw a man teaching people how to eat fire. Something about the performance lit a spark in him. That spark led him to pursue acting seriously. He auditioned at all the major drama schools in London and eventually landed a place at the Drama Centre London on scholarship. So what happened when this young Irish actor finally got his big break? The one that got away. After graduating in 1975, Pierce began working in theater. His big break came when he was cast in the British premiere of The Red Devil Battery Sign, a play by the legendary Tennessee Williams. Pierce was initially hired as an understudy, but Williams, who was directing the production, was so impressed with the young actor that he promoted him to the lead role of McCabe, and he performed so well that it caused a sensation in London. In 1982, Pierce landed the lead role in the TV series Remington Steele, an NBC detective series opposite Stephanie Zimbalist. The show told the story of a mysterious and charming con man who pretends to be a detective, teaming up with a smart female investigator. Pierce's character was smooth and always impeccably dressed. Audiences loved him, and almost immediately, critics began calling for Pierce to be crowned the next James Bond. The comparisons were flattering, but they created a problem. Pierce was trapped in a 7-year contract with NBC for Remington Steele, and that trap was about to cost him the role of a lifetime. In 1986, Pierce Brosnan had 1 year left on his NBC contract and was just days away from becoming James Bond. The producers of the Bond films had noticed him. His charm, looks, and confidence made him the perfect choice to take over the iconic role of 007. Everything seemed to be going his way. Pierce was relieved when Remington Steele was canceled by NBC due to falling ratings. Finally, he was free. But then, something unexpected happened. The news that Pierce was about to become James Bond caused a surge of interest in the canceled series. People wanted to see the man who would be the next 007. NBC saw an opportunity. The network had a 60-day window to reverse its cancellation decision. They exercised that option. At 6:30 in the evening on the 60th day, Pierce learned that NBC had decided to make a 5th season of Remington Steele. Because of his contract, Pierce was legally required to return to the show. The Bond producers couldn't wait for him. They didn't want James Bond to be confused with a TV character, so they quickly moved on and offered the role to Timothy Dalton instead. For Pierce, it was a devastating blow. He had worked so hard, and just when it was finally going to happen, the opportunity was taken away. Remington Steele finally ended in 1987. Pierce was now a free agent, but the role of James Bond was no longer available. He starred in a string of films over the next several years, including the supernatural thriller Nomads in 1986, The Fourth Protocol in 1987, and the miniseries Noble House in 1988. None of them matched the stature of Bond, but he kept working, that if the chance came again, he would be ready. 8 years later, in 1994, that chance finally returned. This time, no contracts were standing in the way. The Bond producers once again saw that Pierce was the right man for the job. Timothy Dalton had stepped down after 2 Bond films, and the search for a new 007 led back to Pierce Brosnan. This time, nothing could stop it. When Pierce was officially named as the new James Bond in 1994, it was a huge moment, not just for him, but for the entire Bond franchise. He was 41 years old and had the perfect mix of maturity, elegance, and energy. The years of waiting had made him stronger, and now he was ready. Finally, Pierce Brosnan had become James Bond. But could he revive a franchise that many believed was dead? The Golden Era. When Pierce was officially named as the new James Bond in 1994, the role he had almost lost forever was finally his. When GoldenEye hit theaters on November 17, 1995, James Bond had been absent from the big screen for 6 years. Since then, many people have wondered if Bond still had a place in the modern world. Some critics believed the Bond series was outdated, stuck in the past, and unable to adapt. GoldenEye changed everything. Directed by Martin Campbell, the film introduced a modernized Bond who was still charming and stylish, but also more emotionally complex and physically capable. The production budget was $58 million, a substantial investment that reflected the studio's confidence in Pierce. The film opened to critical acclaim and enormous box office success. It earned $35 million in its opening weekend in the United States alone. Worldwide, GoldenEye grossed $356 million, making it the fourth highest-grossing film of 1995. Following the triumph of GoldenEye, Pierce returned as 007 in Tomorrow Never Dies, released on December 19, 1997. The film explored themes of fake news and media power that would prove remarkably prescient. The production budget was $110 million. Tomorrow Never Dies faced an enormous challenge. It was released just 1 week after Titanic, which would go on to become the highest-grossing film in history. The film still made $333 million worldwide. 2 years later, on November 19, 1999, Pierce returned for his third Bond film, The World Is Not Enough. This movie took the franchise in a darker and more emotional direction. It explored deeper themes, including betrayal, trust, and personal pain. The film's main villain, Elektra King, played by Sophie Marceau, was the first main female villain in the Bond series. Pierce later described this film as the favorite of his 4 Bond outings because of the character depth it allowed him to explore. The film's opening sequence featured a high-speed boat chase on the River Thames, one of the most memorable in Bond history. Despite some criticism, The World Is Not Enough earned $361 million globally. Then came Die Another Day on November 22, 2002. It was the 20th Bond film and the 40th anniversary of the franchise. The production budget was $142 million, making it the most expensive Bond film ever made at that time. It starred Halle Berry as Jinx, an Academy Award-winning actress who became one of the most famous Bond girls in franchise history. Die Another Day became Pierce's highest-grossing Bond film, making nearly $432 million worldwide. But it also marked a turning point. Many fans and critics felt that the film had pushed things too far. The overuse of CGI, the unrealistic gadgets, and the reliance on special effects were seen as signs that the series was losing its balance. The invisible car, in particular, was widely mocked. Nevertheless, Pierce had reached the peak of his success as Bond. He had revived a dying franchise, delivered 4 commercially successful films, and brought the character into the modern era. After a decade of success and 4 blockbuster films, Pierce Brosnan believed he would return for a 5th adventure. But what happened next would shock him and the entire world. What was the call that came in 2004? And why did it change everything? The second betrayal. After 4 hugely successful James Bond films, Pierce Brosnan believed he was coming back for a 5th. So did the rest of the world. But then something strange happened. After all the praise and success, there was silence. Pierce, like the fans, was left waiting. He assumed the studio was just taking its time with development, but behind the scenes, things were shifting. The studio was considering a new direction for the franchise, and Pierce's name was quietly being pushed aside. In the years that followed, Pierce slowly began to speak more openly about what had happened. His disappointment was aimed at the people who decided without giving him a chance to say goodbye properly. Pierce later criticized the studio, calling their decision unimaginative and lacking courage. He didn't see himself as too old for the role, and neither did many fans. He believed he still had something to give. Pierce was 51 when he was replaced. Sean Connery was 53 when he made his final Bond film. Roger Moore was 57 in his final Bond outing. Pierce had years of performance left in him. Still, he chose to handle it with grace. But while the world saw Pierce Brosnan as the charming, confident James Bond, his personal life was unfolding in ways that no one could have imagined. What tragedies was he enduring behind the scenes that would have broken most men? The hidden heartbreak. Pierce Brosnan's life off-screen has been shaped just as much by loss and heartbreak as by success and fame. Behind the charm and polished smile lies a man who has lived through deep personal pain. His story of love and grief begins with Cassandra Harris, the woman he called his North Star. Pierce met Cassandra in 1977. She was an Australian actress with a striking presence and a kind heart. Born Sandra Waits on December 15, 1948, she changed her name to Cassandra Harris when she began her acting career. She was older than Pierce by 4 years, more experienced in both life and the entertainment industry. She had 2 children from a previous marriage, Charlotte and Christopher, just 4 and 3 years old when Pierce entered their lives. Cassandra played a pivotal role in launching Pierce's career. In 1981, while filming For Your Eyes Only, where she played Countess Liesl von Schlaff, she introduced Pierce to producer Albert R. Broccoli. That meeting planted the seeds that would eventually lead to Pierce's casting as 007 more than a decade later. In 1987, Cassandra was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, the same disease that had taken her mother's life. The years that followed were filled with hospital visits, surgeries, and treatments. Pierce stood by her side through all of it. In interviews, Pierce has said that watching someone one loves fade away slowly and painfully leaves a permanent mark on one's soul. On December 28, 1991, Cassandra passed away at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. She was just 43 years old. Pierce was heartbroken. He lost not only his wife, but also his best friend, the person who had helped him become the man he was. After her death, Pierce legally adopted Charlotte and Christopher. Then, in 1994, something unexpected happened. Pierce met Keely Shea Smith, an American journalist and environmental activist. She was working as a correspondent for Entertainment Tonight and was assigned to interview Pierce. "I walked into the room and saw her," Pierce recalled. "My heart just stopped." What began as a professional encounter grew into a quiet romance that deepened over time. They married on August 5, 2001, in a beautiful ceremony in Ireland, surrounded by friends, family, and nature. Together, Pierce and Keely had 2 sons, Dylan and Paris. But life continued to test him. In 2013, more than 20 years after losing Cassandra, Pierce faced another unbearable loss. His adopted daughter Charlotte also died of ovarian cancer, the same illness that had taken her mother. She was just 41 years old. Losing Charlotte was like reliving the nightmare all over again. For years, Christopher struggled with severe drug addiction. The pain of watching a child destroy himself was something Pierce described as one of the deepest sorrows of his life. Pierce tried everything to help: rehabilitation programs, emotional support, and pleading with Christopher to get clean. Eventually, Pierce made the most difficult decision of his life. He cut Christopher off. After enduring years of professional rejection and personal tragedy, how did Pierce Brosnan find the strength to keep going? And what happened in November 2025 that finally brought him peace? Finding strength and reconciliation. After the heartbreak of being replaced as James Bond, Pierce faced a choice. He could let the rejection define him, or he could use it as motivation to reinvent himself. He chose the latter. He had to kill off Bond inside himself to move forward. And he did. His first step was to take risks. In 2005, he starred in The Matador, a dark comedy directed by Richard Shepard. Instead of playing a smooth, heroic figure, Pierce played Julian Noble, a worn-out, deeply insecure hitman who wore loud shirts, drank too much, and wandered around hotel lobbies in his underwear. It was the total opposite of Bond. The film had a budget of just $12.5 million. Pierce was willing to work for scale just to get the role. Critics loved the performance, and Pierce received a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actor in a Musical or Comedy. That was the proof he needed to know he could still have a whole career outside being James Bond. In 2008, Pierce did something no one expected. He sang. In Mamma Mia, the big screen adaptation of the ABBA musical, he joined a cast that included Meryl Streep, Colin Firth, and Amanda Seyfried. The film, directed by Phyllida Lloyd, cost $52 million to produce and made over $600 million at the global box office. Pierce's musical numbers were widely mocked, but he took it in stride. The film's success led to a sequel, Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again. In 2018, which earned nearly $400 million worldwide, Pierce had become a pop culture icon. But even as his career flourished, the personal wounds remained open. His adopted son, Christopher's addiction and estrangement had been a source of pain for decades. Then, in November 2025, everything changed. Father and son were photographed together in London, walking side by side. The image stunned fans and media alike. After 2 decades of separation, they had reconciled. At 73, Pierce continues to work. The Thursday Murder Club was released on Netflix in September 2025 to critical acclaim, and he has expressed interest in a sequel. He has also spoken about returning to Bond, not as 007, but as a retired agent, telling reporters that if a director like Denis Villeneuve had a good idea, he would consider it. What do you think was Pierce Brosnan's biggest hidden struggle? After everything he's endured, do you believe Pierce Brosnan's resilience makes him even more inspiring than his performances on screen? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.